Don Hyatt is today's speaker. Most of you are familiar with Don because he spoke to us at least twice before, maybe three times. Don is a retired computer science teacher from Northern Virginia. He's maintained a lifelong interest in rhododendrons and azaleas that began in his early childhood. He's written numerous articles for Rhododendron and Azalea Society publications. He's been active in many aspects of the ARS, holding leadership positions, resulting in his being awarded both the silver and gold medals from the ARS and the Distinguished Service Award from the Azalea Society of America. Don, I very much remember when you were running where was that convention? Was it Williamsburg?
Williamsburg, I think.
Yes, running around like a chicken with your head cut off. It looked like you needed to clone yourself. That was quite a job you had there.
Anytime you co-chair a convention, it's insane.
Yeah, I'll bet. Don continues to dabble in hybridizing, botanical illustrations, photography, and anything related to horticulture. So today, Don's talk is entitled, What's New? Rhododendron Hybrids Developed for Northeast Gardens. The book Hybrids and Hybridizers, published 45 years ago, showcased hybridizers such as Gable, Dexter, Nearing, and Morrison, who developed rhododendrons and azaleas suitable for Eastern North America. And by the way, that's an excellent book, Hybrids and Hybridizers. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend it. You'll probably be able to get it real cheap out on Amazon or some other place. Very, very worth reading. Don's presentation will begin with a brief look at some of those original pioneers, then shift to promising creations by modern plant hybridizers. He'll provide short vignettes of a number of people he's known who've been developing exciting new rhododendrons for our region. He'll also suggest directions for future rhododendron hybridizing, since we still have much to do. Welcome, Don.
Thank you.
Take it away.
It's a pleasure to join you. I'm glad I'm not having any snow today. Well, I am going to speak about what's new, but these are plants that you probably won't find at the box stores. But before we get there, I want to have a brief commercial message. Our chapter is hosting a district meeting in Annapolis, Maryland, April 28th and 30th. And we want to invite you to come down if you're in the area. It starts on a Sunday and winds up on a Tuesday, and then you can head off to the West Coast. We have a cheap hotel, $99 plus tax. We'll be going to London Town Gardens. That's the focus. And it's a public garden situated on a knoll overlooking one of the tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. It's a lovely garden. We're going to private gardens. This is the garden of Carol Segree. Richard Bradshaw. He's got a 10-acre, he has a 100-acre estate, 10 acres fenced, ponds, all kinds of neat stuff, camellias. Bob and Rosa McWhorter. They have a lot of rhododendrons, and many of these plants were ones that we bought when we came up here to the Sandwich Club auctions. We've been coming up to Cape Cod since, I think, 1988, and almost every year. And that was a wonderful opportunity. And so we see a lot of the plants that were developed up here on the Cape down in our gardens, and they do very well. So now back to our regular program. Now, Hybrids and Hybridizers was published in 1978, and it's a wonderful book. And I wanted to go through where we are today. But before we do that, look at some of the original pioneers. We had Joe Gable, and he produced Marybelle and Cadus, wonderful plants. There's the Cadus and the original Cadus in the Gable garden, which is still there. This is Cadus in one of the gardens in our area that is an impressive plant.
We have it.
Then Marybelle, wonderful plant. But the thing about Marybelle, it comes out pink and then fades to buff. It was named for his wife, Marybelle. A visitor noted, Marybelle is not as easy to grow as some other Gables, And Carolyn Gable said, well, Mother was not always that easy to get along with either. And then there's Caroline. And Caroline was not named for Carolyn Gable, but for Gable's mother. And that's a monster plant. This was Caroline in my backyard at one time. And then Joe Gable and Guy Nearing were close friends. And they shared seed a lot. This was from the cross decorum, cross Griffithianum, cross kettle drum. And Joe Gable named one, and so did Guy Nearing. Nearing's plant Rochelle versus whatever it is up there.
Gretchen.
Gretchen. Okay, I have a bar across the top I'd like to get rid of because it's blocking half. Do you all see that bar across the top?
Yes.
Because it interferes with the top things. Well, I'm going to start appreciating some of the pioneers with Guy Nearing. There's his Rochelle and Windbeam, wonderful plants.
Don, I don't see it on mine. It's possible something you can change on your,
Yeah, that's what I was.
yeah.
Hide video panel. That didn't work. Well, I'll just fake it.
We'll fill in the blanks for you.
Okay. If there's something I can't read. There's Mary Fleming in the landscape in the Beaudry Garden. And Ed Mezet did a lot of things, and Charles Dexter, of course,
Ooh.
phenomenal, the Dexter legacy, and would come up here all the time. And here's display area, Heritage Plantation. And Charles Dexter, who's in that book, Hybrids and Hybridizers, the story of his life, he was diagnosed with a bad heart at age 59, and he was in the textile industry, and they said, well, you're not going to make it. You better retire. And so he bought a heritage plantation, a farm, and he retired to a 76-acre estate. And then he got interested in plants, and he started planting rhododendron seeds. He grew rhododendron seedlings, and it became a passion. He raised 200,000 seedlings in the next 22 years, and he lived to the ripe old age of 81. So the only thing you can do is rhododendrons are good for your health. So when in doubt, indulge. Doctor's orders. Some of the ones that particularly fawned down our way were Dexter's brown eyes, lovely pink and brown blotch. Then that's Heritage Plantation, Dexter Spice. I remember coming up here in 1980 and seeing the original Dexter Spice before it broke off. And this is Dexter's Honeydew, which is a lovely plant. And then the paths around the Heritage Plantation with all the Dexter rhododendrons were just so wonderful. This is one called Spectacular. It's large pink flowers, yellow centers, and it's very fragrant, but people say it smells like beer, but I don't really get that from the smell. It's just, I like the fragrance, but of course I like beer too, but that's beside the point. Then there's the Dexter's Dell, and that's where they planted most of the named hybrid Dexters down in the Dell. And you see things like Wyandanch Pink, very winter hardy, supposed to be minus 25. Avondale, lovely red. Gigi, one of the better reds, rose reds with dots, spots. And there's Dexter's Giant Red, which looks quite similar. Todd Morden, bicolor. And then there's some that have not the best plant habit. One is Wissahickon, and we see that in the nurseries all the time. It's apparently very easy to propagate. And that's one of the few Dexters that we see sold down here. And it just has a god-awful plant habit. I mean, look at that thing. It winds around. And Butter and Eggs is another one that's very, very pretty flower, but very straggly plant for us. And then we have Jeannie Gillis. Now, they named this one for the horticulturist at Heritage Plantation. And the thing about when you name a rhododendron and you register it, that name is taken and cannot be used to name another plant in the rhododendron family. Well, the trouble, Jeannie Gillis, they like the flower, but when they saw the plant habit, it is absolutely the worst. It crawls around on the ground. It's like a vine. Look at that thing. Not the best plant. There are some, the Consolini hybrids, and there are people taking pictures of several famous ones. That's Consolini's red, and I remember seeing that. Well, Consolini's windmill. When I remember seeing that when I came to the convention in 1980 up here. And there's Bellringer beside it, another wonderful plant for us. Take sun or shade. Consolini's windmill, a little harder to keep alive than in difficult years, but Bellringer is tough as nails and has good dark foliage. And there's the original Bellringer at Consolini's home, and that's in 2008, and that's Jean Baudry standing in front of the original Consolini's Bellringer. Now, the Pilkingtons were a couple on the Cape, and when Tony Consolini decided to sell his property, they bought the land so that they could save the plants, and they brought most of them to their own garden to grow. That's Evelyn Pilkington and Harold Pilkington, and they had a wonderful garden, and there's Jean Baudry and Will Smith, and we would come up here every year and talk to them, and there's the Pilkington home. And then Jean Baudry and Evelyn Pilkington, and that's the rhododendron she's holding is Evelyn Pilkington that they named for her. Another one is Jack Cole's. And some of the plants up there on the Cape, the rhododendron Jack Cole's is one of our very favorites, just a ruffled yellow and center pink edge. And then Mary Collins was named by Ed Collins, who was one of the hybridizers down in New Jersey, who was up here all the time, strolling amongst the Dexters. And at Heritage Plantation, they have the Coles Garden, and that's a very lovely display with some of the Coles hybrids. And there's our sandwich club, and we're standing in front of the rhododendron Jack Coles. And that one incidentally does well down in our area as well. John Wister was very interested in the Dexter hybrids. And the thing is, Dexter didn't name a single rhododendron himself, but there was a Dexter study group organized by a number of people, and John Wister was on that group, and he sort of went to the Tyler Arboretum and brought a lot of plants there, and they had sort of the second generation F2 Dexters, Swarthmore Dexters that are planted out there. And if you went to the convention, I guess it was 2019 in Philly, they had a tour of the estate there, Tyler Arboretum. And some nice plants, not probably anything you need to name, but they certainly made nice landscape plants. Well, the Tyler Arboretum, being so close to Philadelphia area, the Philadelphia chapters have decided that they wanted to do a rhododendron test garden because there are a lot of really nice things developed by hybridizers, and they get lost when the hybridizer passes on. And so they decided to develop a test garden at Tyler, and it's an ongoing project. They want to appreciate the past, evaluate new plants, showcase the best, and look to the future. So one advantage to Tyler is they have a deer fence, and it's like 8 feet tall, and they fence the whole property so they don't get eaten. Now, I don't trust it. I've been looking at deer fences, but I'm convinced that those deer are so cagey, it doesn't make any difference how tall they'll get it. They'll still get in. Well, what Carl Bernardi and the members of that group, and they now call themselves the Delaware Valley chapter of the ARS, they've merged with Valley Forge and the Greater Philadelphia. They've been requesting nominations for plants to consider in their garden. They've been making selections, gathering cuttings. Then they go through a rooting process. They transplant, grow them out to a larger size, and then they have to prepare the soil. They dig holes and they line them out. This is not at Tyler, but this is at the David Leach Experimental Station. They have problems sometimes, but you have to evaluate it. You can find, look, that plant's alive. It's alive. Well, the Pennsylvania chapters were trying to focus on the quest for yellows and trying to use potential hybridizers in their area. So Joe Minahan, Joe Bacallis, Tom Ahern, Kurt Moser, John Doppel, and some others. And of course, we look at Donald Hargrove, which was Golden Star, was one of our early good yellows. And I bought a plant of that when I went to my first rhododendron convention on Long Island in 1978. I came back with 3 plants. I was one of the first to get into the plant sale. I got Golden Star, and I got Hardy Giant, and I got one more, which was Bell Rose, and brought those back to be used in our area. Well, Howard Phipps developed Phipps 32, which is another nice yellow. Golden Star by some unknown yellow seedling. Then Scintillation, of course, is a wonderful parent. Thing about Scintillation is it has no pollen. So you don't have to worry about taking all the anthers off. You just dabble pollen on the pistil, and if it develops in a big seed pod, you got a new good cross. It's a good seed parent. Janet Blair is also a wonderful parent in hybridizing, and they discovered that it carries color. Janet Blair is sometimes pale lavender pink to blush in our area if the temperature goes up, but it carries color when you cross something onto it. That color comes through. It also has good hardiness. A honeydew and Apertan are both very similar. They bloom a little bit apart. They look almost alike. We like them both. They have large flowers and they're also fragrant. Now, Joe Minahan has been doing was doing a lot of hybridizing, and he was one of the ones. They almost spurred the development of this hybridizer test garden because he developed, I think it was colon cancer, and passed away quite suddenly. And he had a lot of plants that he had developed, and he would often take one cross and grow a lot of seedlings from it and select the best. And so you'll see some similar crosses. He did Janet Blair by Phipps Yellow, and Cause of Our Joy was Mary Bell by Mars by Phipps Yellow. And he, from that cross, Mary Bell Mars by Phipps Yellow, got a lot of really nice things out of it. Ark of the Covenant, that was the same cross. And one called House of Gold, Mary Bell Mars by Phipps Yellow. And so here's Joe Minahan's front yard, and he would raise his rhododendrons out there, take a lot of seedlings, kill them off, put the best ones out there, and test them in his own garden. And so when he passed away, they dug up a lot of the plants and took them to places to protect, and they tried to propagate them. And here's another Mary Bell by Phipps Yellow that named Norman Beaudry. And then Howard Roberts, similar cross, Mary Bell by Odie Wright. But this is the one when you were in Joe's yard would just scream. It was just the most intense yellow. It may not show up in this slide, but it just was so clear. It had the deep red blotch in the throat. And he named that for Kurt Moser, and that's Mary Bell Odie Wright by Phipps Yellow. So doing those crosses with lots of yellow in the background, he liked to use Mary Bell as a parent and Phipps Yellow as a parent. But there's Pert Moser, a really nice yellow. And Pope John Paul II, that's another one of his, probably his best red, and we've seen that in Germany. They had it at Hockman had it in his garden. really nice truss. Often wins best in show at conferences. That was Jean Marie de Montague crossed with Cheer. Jean Marie de Montague very rarely sets seed. I think it's a triploid, and you don't get many seeds in a cross, but you can get some nice things from it occasionally. Now, Joe Bacalli's, here are two from him, Fashion Plate and Honeydew with Kubla Khan. Fashion plate is used a lot in hybridizing. Here's a picture Ron Rabideau took of Fashion Plate, big light yellow flowers. It's got a rather long parentage, Fortunite Cream by Vernicosum 18139, Cross Marybelle by Dido by Chlorops, Cross Lacteum by Golden Star. Tom Ahern has done a lot of hybridizing. He did his accomplishment by Fashion Plate. And Bisque, Rio by Dexter's Tan, and it's an interesting color. It's not quite yellow. It's sort of an off yellow, but a very pretty artistic shade. And this was some thing that starts with a K that I can't see. Tom Everett by Fashion Plate.
That was Kayla Joy.
Kayla Joy. Okay, thank you. I wish I could get rid of that darn. Blazing Grace, another one of his hybrids. Percy Wiseman crossed with September Song. Percy Wiseman, Joe was talking about that earlier, is a very good parent. It allows interesting colors to come through. We have a hard time growing it because it doesn't like the heat. But if you can grow it long enough to make a cross on it, you can get some good stuff. Now, John Doppel, Califrilli, and Diane's Delight, sort of a Sappho lookalike and a Purple Splendor lookalike. Diane's Delight just glows in our area, just very brilliant purple. Here are a few more: Austin's Firecracker, Ruth's Showstopper, Angelina D and Dawn Star, and Pert Moser, Madeline Winter. That's a cross very similar. It's Yak Exbury by Fortunine. Tough foliage, beautiful trusses, really nice plant. Sugary, it's sort of a blush with a red center. And when that one first comes out, I think the color's more pink first and then becomes white as it ages. E.C. Sterling crossed the morning after. Now, Bert Moser is one person I'd like to focus on because he lives in a very exquisite neighborhood, and I mean in all beautiful big homes. And quite often, many hybridizers will have all these little junky things. I have stuff in front of my front door, and it just doesn't look good, but he has been able to hide things. And when you're there looking at his garden, all you see is sweeping lawn, landscaping. And when you go around to the garden, he's got these little paths, and in behind things, he will have a place where he's got seedlings just out of the basement, out from the artificial lights. And then he has another little place that you don't see, and he's got seedlings that are growing up and planted out and all tagged and so on. And eventually he'll plant them out. Usually he gives a lot of them away, but that's a wonderful way to hide your hybridizing efforts so that people don't see it. Now, Bill Ryan did a lot of nice things. He's got Ryan's Luna, which is a nice light blue, lavender blue. Ryan's Piketty, which is quite pretty. Sappho by Janet Blair. And then some potential hybridizers in the New York, New Jersey area. They've extended and asked some of them, they're including some of them in their test garden. Alan and Shirley Anderson, both of them have passed away, but they'd had some wonderful things. And One is Sundust. That was Nancy Evans crossed with Janet Blair. You can see how the Nancy Evans yellow-orange color came through with Janet Blair. And then my Jane, a really nice yellow. Arctic Gold cross Hardgrove's Deepest Yellow cross Phipps Yellow. Sea Gold and Amanda Joan Young. Another couple of nice plants from them. April Rhapsody, they was trying to develop some of the dwarf blues. And Bob's Red cross Red Bomber. Now, Dick Murcott spoke at the 2019 convention, and he spoke on the ironclads, but he's done some wonderful things. And I guess on the last New York convention, his garden was open for tour and just had some really nice things. TT 240, TT 1, Janet Blair cross Margaret by Wood Wrench. See how Janet Blair makes a nice flower with a nice truss. Bud Genrich, his Lemon Zest, very pretty. And Lemon Zest is Janet Blair crossed with Phipps Yellow. And you see Janet, you don't see much from Janet Blair other than the flower shape, the hardiness, the good foliage, and the blotch. But the color came through of Phipps Yellow. And Bud's Yellow is a nice one. That's Inca Gold by Yak, by Warty Eye, by Dexter's Orange. And then if we have to pick a hybridizer on the East Coast who's done some phenomenal things, it's George Woodard, who was in charge of the Phipps estate. And he had sort of the whole 700 acres for him to play with and cross. And he did a lot of hybridizing. And some of the things he was looking for was bud count. He wanted a lot of buds in the truss. And here's one of his yellows. Karen Triplet crossed with Big Deal number 3. And you can see some of the 1,000 Butterflies by Yak by Phipps 32 by Gosh Darn. And 1,000 Butterflies by Yak Phipps 32 Viennese Waltz crossed Gosh Darn. And look at those trusses, aren't they fantastic? Mary S. Phipps crossed Avocet and Mary S. Phipps itself. And also flower shapes. Started getting some that had double flowers and some that had long petal, almost petaloid flowers, Whitestone. It was a double cross with a whole bunch of other stuff. And I don't know if you were at the 2010 convention, but this was the plant we were admiring in the landscape. It got best in show. I don't know what the cross was, but it was certainly spectacular. The late Werner Brack did a lot of crossing. We went to his garden in 2010, and he had Janet Blair by Phipps 84, big flowers, nice blotch. White Elegance, and that was Janet Blair by Phipps 84, just a sister seedling. Janet's Fantasy, Apricot Fantasy crossed with Janet Blair. And see how the Janet Blair color just not there. One of his that's gotten a lot of interest was Gotham Rheingold, and this was up, I guess, in Nova Scotia. They saw this, they had bought one, toe tie by Phipps Yellow. It looks like it should be fairly tender, but it's got color, just very clear, wonderful yellow. Now, Rare Fine Nursery, we missed that. That was Hank Shannon and his Solidarity. Hank was a wonderful person, did so much for the ARS. I have Hank's Mellow Yellow, and there's one called Lavender Ice. I've got Solidarity. I like to grow plants that remind me of people. And Ron Rabideau used to work up there at the nursery, and he has Absolute Citron as one of his yellows that is on the market. And here's Hardy Giant. I brought that back in '78, and it's in Norman and Jean Beaudry's garden. that was one of the Nippenbergs, and I think it won Best in Show when we were up there at that first 78 convention. And just huge trusses, and you like big rhododendrons for places that have room. And there are a number of people that are trying to do that. And this is Fortunae by Fictolacteum. Now, we've had some of the people in our middle Atlantic area that have been invited to participate as well. Ed Riley, George Rings, Hybrids, Ray and Jay Goodrich, Norm Beaudry, Sandra McDonald, Helen Myers, and some others. Ed's Butter is a yellow that seems to be quite nice. Riley Ridge Sweet Sue, Rugged Plant. This is one, Riley Ridge Bright Day, that I was impressed with this year. Had really nice big flowers. I saw that in western part of Virginia in the mountains. Looked like one again. Now, George Ring was one of the founders of our chapter, and he did a lot of hybridizing, did azaleas and rhododendrons. Helen Ring he named for his wife, and Oakton he named for the city where his house was staged, and also Fairfax, his best evergreen azalea, a really nice plant. Now, Ray and Jane Goodrich, they did a lot of crossing, and she was really into gable stuff, and so she did Catfort Campy #2 crossed with Mary Garrison, and we call that Jane's Orange. It's sort of like Dexter's Orange, except it's not as touchy down our way than Dexter's Orange. We have trouble keeping that one alive. And this is a Rain Goodrich cross as John C. White. And that's really a top-notch plant. It's one of our rhododendrons of the year. And here's John C. White in Carol Segree's garden. And this is part of one of the gardens on tour. And it's Vulcan crossed with Gables Fortunae. Just nice, beautiful trusses, well-shaped plant. Does so well. Now, Norman and Jean Beaudry, we lost Jean a couple of years ago, but Norm was the chair of the seed exchange, and he was always making crosses, and they were very interested in yellows. And here's when we went up to see Bob Furman's big yellow. And we thank Mike Medeiros for making some of those plants available, because we brought back some, and I know I've heard discussion, I guess a number of people from your chapter probably picked plants up. It was nothing like driving a 1,000-mile round trip to buy a rhododendron. This is Lara Janine, one of the Beaudry's crosses. It's a light yellow, but I just think the flowers are so delicate and ruffled, named for their daughter. And Norm was into big plants, and this is Nestucca crossed with Maximum by Calophytum. Big flower, big trusses, big leaves. Sandra McDonald didn't do too many rhododendron crosses, but this is Janet Blair crossed with Purple Splendor and produced Purple Pansy. Hyper George, we use Hyperrhythrum a lot because it's very heat tolerant. And this is one of Sandra's that was in her front yard. Hyperrhythrum crossed with Loderi King George, which looks sort of like Hyperrhythrum on steroids. And there's George McClellan after one of his skirmishes. Kenny Mack, this is one we're just introducing this year, was one of Sandra's seedlings named for Ken McDonald. And it's Clua Sensation by Caroline. It's an unusual reddish purple with a strong blotch. But most of Sandra's contributions have been in evergreen azaleas. And the Norfolk Botanical Garden already has a whole display garden of Sandra's hybrids. And we need to have more display gardens where the public can see more than what's in the typical Home Depot, Walmart shopping areas, the box stores. But here's Venus's Baby, Blushing Angel, Dreamsicle, and Tidewater Firecracker. Some of Sandra's, and this is Sandra's Green Ice. And I just told Sandra, Sandra, of all the azaleas you've grown, I think this is my very favorite. It's so full and ruffled and so many flowers. She said, Don, did you ever look at the registration on that? She said, you made the cross and donated it to the seed exchange. I said, oh, I like it even better. Now, Marshy Point azaleas. These are some by the late Harry Weiskittle. He had a wholesale nursery in Baltimore. And he did a lot of hybridizing for evergreen azaleas. And he is being featured at our convention. And so few of those Marshy Point Showgirl, Marshy Point Daisy, Marshy Point Fancy Pants, Marshy Point Soft Touch. And here's Bob and Rosa McWhorter. They have a lovely home that's featured, but they have little places where they're storing their plants. And this is one of their rhododendrons that said, oh, I really like that one. And they said they got it from the seed exchange, scintillation by Apertan. And they said, Don, you made the cross. I like it even better. It's a lovely plant. But you know, I don't take credit for any of these things. I have done nothing more than what a bumblebee did. It's the person who raises the plant and selects it is the one who deserves the credit, because I kill off everything. Helen Myers, this is a plant. She had an open pollinated blue Peter. It looks like it was probably crossed with Fortune Eye or something, which had a lot of pollen. But this is a lovely plant in our area, very prominent. But the bees made that cross. Now, I had made crosses. I continue to make crosses. There I am trying to make a couple of crosses. And you know, I'm now in my second childhood. And one of my goals is to make the ugliest rhododendron I can to name it for a former principal I worked for. And so I want a flower that's just ugly. I want foliage that's just terrible. I want to have ghastly plant habit. It has to be no winter hardiness, should have a high bud count, but the bud should never open. And when I get that plant, I'm naming it for her. Well, I did have a pretty garden. This was my garden at one time. I was on the rhododendron azalea garden tours, and we had 2009, my garden was on tour, and this is what it looked like then, but it has gone through some stresses. Of course, we've had snow, and we had 10 inches of snow with temperatures below freezing for a full week. And then yesterday or the day before, we hit 80 degrees. That's tough on plants. But we have deer. And this was my garden at that convention, 2009. And this is what it looked like in 2015, a few years later, when the deer decided they would eat everything in sight. Then I got the 2018 I had 8 feet of rain in 12 months. Now my soil is heavy. It has a lot of clay in it, but it also has a lot of organic matter. And I had no problem with that. In the past, you know, it kept moisture. I didn't have a problem. When you get 8 feet of rain, all of a sudden, all of your soil turns like river bottom muck. And you can water a plant that's dry, but there's no way you can suck water out of muck. And so I had just a terrific casualty. Here's my Caroline looking off my deck. And after that flood that lasted, even Caroline, as tough a root system as this had, it could not take that amount of moisture. So it died. And everything around it died. Then the next year we had a half an inch of rain for the entire 4 months of the summer and blistering heat. Climate change is rough on plants. Then I had an attack of a new problem. It's bacterial leaf scorch. And this is a bacterial disease that's spread normally by leafhoppers. And certain trees are much more susceptible. And I have primarily chestnut oaks. And I lost 9 of my big oaks. And they were over 100 years old. And they were 80 to 120 feet tall, many of them. And just, you can compare here, you can see on the right, there's a man cutting down part of the tree, and I have a little stack of that same man beside the tree just to show how tall those trees were. And so that was my garden before dappled shade. Then they had to drop the trees right in the backyard. And my yard is so landlocked there's no way I can get the wood out. I can't get any heavy equipment in there. So right now I've got a pile of logs, and they will be nurse logs, and I just can't do anything with it at the moment. So I've begun the reality of moving from dappled shade to trying to garden in the equivalent of the Sahara Desert or Kuwait. Does pose problems. I find wine helps. I have a couple of plants. This is one I called Martin Keister White that I liked. It was a yak by Metternichii. And I liked it because it kept its foliage for 6 years, and you can see it makes it very full plant, and a plant that has nice foliage and keeps it for multiple years is a good thing. Of course, then if a lot of the plants we buy from the West Coast, they don't even keep their foliage for 1 year. Now let's look at your Northeast pioneers, because when I look at the contributions to the Rhododendron Society and the plants we can grow on the East, so much of it has come from your area. And I think back to people that I knew, Dick Brooks, Ed and Wayne Mezett, Ian Donovan, Basil Potter, Gus Melquist, Joe Park, Jonathan Leonard, B. McDonald, Barbara and Henry Wrightington, to name a few, and there are so many others that I didn't have time to put in. Bill Teachin, who was chapter ARS president, and he was the one that lined up so much. He handled a seed exchange, I think, for quite a while. Now here's Dick Brooks, which was one of the plants, one of the seedlings from your founders day when you have your chapter seed exchange. And I think the cross was Dexter's giant red crossed with a dwarf yak. And it was said it was the equivalent of crossing a mouse with an elephant, but it had a beautiful pink truss. And this is thanks to Sally and John Perkins. This was in the ARS Journal. And Dick Brooks was a wonderful person. I know most of you probably knew him, but he was so kind and generous. Then Ed and Wayne Mezett, I sort of grouped them together, the Weston's Pink Diamond and PJM. So many wonderful plants. Weston's Aglow and Olga Mezett and Landmark, all lepidote rhododendrons that we can grow in our area. And then so many of the deciduous azalea, Pennsylvania, Weston's Pennsylvania. Then another batch of wonderful people. Ian Donovan managed your Rose Bay publication for so long, and we all looked to that for the wonderful publication. And then Basil Potter, I think, is that who it is? Rock garden specialist, Gus Melquist.
Yes, Potter.
Huh?
Basil Potter, yeah.
Basil Potter. Yeah. I met him at one of my first conventions. You know, I was in my late teens, I guess, and he was so kind and sit down and talk and encourage people. And I know he was written wonderful rock garden books. Gus Melquist and Joe Parks. Joe Parks was the master of breeding things for cold weather. Then Jonathan Leonard and B. McDonald, the Wrightingtons, Ed Collins. Ed was really not a New Englander. He was from New Jersey, I think, before he moved to North Carolina, but he was up here at the Cape so all the time checking on the Dexters. And there's Barbara Wrightington and B. McDonald, and then the rhododendron B. McDonald. And so all the time people were going through the acres of seedlings and things, trying to find what was planted out in the woods, what should be introduced. And that became a project from 1988 until it lasted 20 years or more. Now, some more Northeast hybridizers. You got Bob and Audrey Furman, Joe Bruzo, Peter Norris, John and Donna Delano, Charlie and CJ Patterson, Barbara and Jean Gingras, Kathy and Dick White, Sally and John Perkins, and others. Now, being a school teacher, I became good friends with Bob and Audrey Furman because in addition to talking rhododendrons, we could talk school. And you talk about all the horrible kids we had and things that went wrong and principals we didn't like. So we had a lot in common. So we came up here a lot. And I was so happy to get my first Bob Furman rhododendron this fall. And I'm going to have a BFBY, hopefully bloom this spring, and I'll make crosses with it. And there's their house up on the Cape. And Bob made some wonderful crosses. And this was one that was really great. And we've repeated it before. Mary Bell crossed with honeydew. And it produced peach cloud. And you can see that big monster plant there. But it also produced peach monarch. And those have been used a lot in breeding down our way. And then there's BFBY, Bob Furman's Big Yellow. And it is really stunning. You know, big, huge flowers, and they're fragrant, and it's got pollen. But Bob was not pleased with it. He said that he wanted his perfection. He wanted a 5-5-5. It had to have perfect flowers, perfect plant habit, perfect foliage. And the problem with BFBY is it was a little open. So he was continuing, always making more crosses, waiting for the next generation. But looking at the cross to date, it was Golden Star by Jalisco, Yak by Dido, by Clorops, by Lacteum, by Golden Star. Really an intensive hybridizing program to get him to that place. Then here was another one. This one had a really nice plant habit. And this is one that they did name called, I can't see that. It's Atlantic Gold, I think.
Atlantic Gold, yes.
Percy Wiseman, Golden Star by Warty Eye, Jalisco, Yak by Odie Wright by Golden Star. And go up and watch Bob in his garden. And, you know, he had only had a small amount of land to deal with. So he had to make selections. And to go up there, and when he was in his decision time, you'd go through and see a pile of rhododendrons that he had just cut up to make into mulch. And sometimes I'd look down and said, oh, that's better than any yellow I ever produced, and he just chopped it up. But you have to do that. Well, this is one we called the 5-year leaf. It was a cross. Look at that foliage, really pretty glossy leaves. The color was not pure yellow. It was sort of a buff yellow. So we decided we needed to cross that. And so this was after Bob had passed away. Norm Beaudry went up to make yet another cross, to cross BFBY onto the 5-year yellow that held its leaves. And looking at some of the other seedlings in the yard, Bob had all his little seedling beds and he would have gone through and cut out a lot of things. But I looked at all of those things, and that's his daughter Debbie with Jean Beaudry looking at some of the seedlings. Really nice things. You know, they may not be registrable, but when I looked at some of the plants in their garden, look at the selection of yellows, from creams to deep yellow to lighter yellow, some more golden, some with blotches. And then some of the more artistic shades, pinks worked in and peachy colors. And he was also interested in reds as well. So he made a lot of crosses for reds. And now, Joe, I have to get to you next, because I was so impressed when we saw your garden and saw all your little plants outside and what you're doing up there. Phenomenal work. This is Vulcan by Yak by Hematoides. Nice bicolor. But it's your species. Oh, everything. Hank Shannon always talked of the species look. And oh, all those Mackinaw plants, they're just spectacular. And then your garden, these huge boulders and just so artistically placed. It's like you're walking in the wilds with plants in their native habitat. So lovely. And then you are also interested in foliage, and I saw this, just the variations of foliage, phenomenal. And then, of course, you were interested in the red max too, and I found that very interesting myself. Spent a lot of time exploring the red max. Well, you were working with it for foliage and breeding in, and so you had some plants that were showing red color, and a number of other people working with you, like Peter Norris, all making crosses with the red max. I thought I should mention a little bit about the red max. This is the original red max down in the wilds of North Carolina, and it was originally discovered when they were building the Blue Ridge Parkway. They were trying to lay out the parkway, and one of the designers ran across a bear trail, went into the woods, and to get there, you have to drive down the parkway. You find this little road, you turn off on the road, you drive for a while, you hike on a path to an opening and a clearing, and then you go into a rhododendron hell, and you work your way up the mountain at a 45-degree angle. No way I would have found that myself. Someone has to take you there. And so this is what you go through, the rhododendron hell, to get to the red max. Just incredible jungle. And then you get up to a place, and then this was the red max in 2004. The people in the southeastern chapter, a group of them they were keeping the red max alive. It had become overgrown. The original plant had number of big trunks, and it practically died. And we don't know whether this was a seedling off the red max or a chance rooted branch off of the original red max, but they were trying to keep it alive. And so they cut down a lot of the trees around it to give it more light, to cut back the vegetation. And there's the red max foliage, which looks so stunning against the sun when it comes through. And if you look at the sap is red. The buds are red, and you can see I pulled the scales off the buds, and there's a bud about to open. And so there it opens into blossoming. It's not a fantastic flower. The interesting thing is that red sap doesn't go into every part of the plant. Sometimes it'll go into one bud, and you'll see the red bud, and then on the right there's one that's white, and that plant will probably have white flowers, and it's all part of the same plant. And sometimes you'll get red and white flowers on the same truss, depending upon whether the sap goes in there. We don't really know what causes it, and there's been some wonderful discussion on the rhododendron group this year. But in the winter of 2010, I was concerned because they had a bad ice storm, everything broken off. And so I decided I'd better go down, check on that red max, because it was leaning at such a steep angle. As I got closer to the plant, I noticed that there had been a fire, and it had charred a lot of things. As I worked my way up the hill, almost everything was dead. And there were lots of big maximum plants on that hill, and they were completely gone. Maximum does not like a fire. It does not regenerate from the base in a fire in most cases. And so I was sure the red max was dead, but I got close to it. I looked through the trees. I could see it was in bloom. The fire got to within 3 feet of one side and 1 foot of the other. And the only thing I can say is that the original people who had been down there caring for that plant, most of them have passed away, but their spirits were there keeping the fire from burning that plant. Well, there was the 2004, and it was alive. And here's what it looked like in 2012. It was just by 2012, it took it a number of years before it started to send up any shoots from the base. Now in 2015, the plants, roots, shoots from the base are much, much better. And here was in 2019, the last time I've been there. It's now up over your head, the red max, and it's back to a vigorous plant. So we feel like we've saved that plant. And we've been taking seed and trying to spread it around. There were lots of places where things were burned, and so I scattered seed on that.
Don?
Yes.
Got a question. The growth that's coming up from the base doesn't look like it's got the red coloration in the foliage.
Some does. It depends upon the more potent, stronger stems do not, but the stuff coming up from the base, it has some red flowers on some of it. So hopefully there'll be little baby red maxes that'll take over, because originally they said there were about 30 of them there at one point. So the red max is alive. And then Peter Norris has been doing wonderful things at Martha's Vineyard. And I wanted to congratulate Peter and Joe Bruzzo and so many of people, including Betty Ann Anderson. I saw her logged on. Betty Ann, you have been so nice to Yasmin Workman, somebody just back into the Rhododendron Society, and she is just so thrilled. And all of the cooperation and kind things you've been doing for her, just really nice. And she had lived in Washington State for a while, then had to move to Florida, just came back and moved on the wrong side of the mountains, where she's dealing with drought and the extremes in temperature, but she's still doing her best, and she's going to raise rhododendrons. And so much of her interest has been encouraged by you, and I think you need to be applauded for that. Well, Peter's been hybridizing with rare species, Uifingensi, Maccabianum, and Asterochnum, whatever it is. And your wonderful place. And then, of course, the Polyhill Arboretum is nearby, and that has a wonderful collection of plants as well. And then John and Donna Delano did so much to support the Sandwich Club. Wonderful people, and we thank all the help that they did. And here they are up at the Heritage Plantation. And then we would identify plants that should be rooted. They would get cuttings, send it off to Van Veen, bring the plants back, pot them up, and then they'd auction them off, and then we'd send them out across the whole East Coast and see how well they did. Wonderful job. We miss our trips up here. Then Charlie and CJ Patterson. CJ's given some wonderful talks on rhododendron foliage, and I know I call it Mackinac, and I think CJ says Mackinac, and we spell it the same. But CJ's into foliage, and also had some wonderful talks that she shared. Barbara and Jean Gingras, wonderful people. They have a wonderful place and they invited us. We'd have picnics there. And here's Jean with Jack Coles. And then Catherine and Dick White, beautiful garden, a lot of neat things in their garden. This is one plant that we really have become impressed with, one he named for Catherine White. And it's sort of like a pale cream, but very frilled and ruffled, sort of like a perfect landscape plant, a perfect companion for Jack Coles. And then I have to mention Dick Janes, Calmia person, not rhododendrons, but wonderful in the nursery business. And then finally, Sally and John Perkins, and we're so deserving that they got the gold medal this year. And I was so happy that I could write a recommendation, because they have been so involved with native azaleas. And so here's Kathy. They found a new place. It's called White Top Mountain. No, there are some Midwest and Southern hybridizers that you probably won't want to deal with. Buddy Lee, nice person. His encore azaleas, they won't probably survive up here. They're difficult in our area. Part of the trouble is that they just don't bloom long enough. Our season is too short. Just about the time they open, the frost comes through and kills them all. John Thornton has done a lot of hybridizing with hyperethrum. And the advantage of hyperethrum is it's very root protective, doesn't get Phytophthora. And so they have the Southgate series. And if you look at any one of those, it doesn't hold a candle to any of the Dexters. But the thing about hyperethrum is, this was the cross of Janet Blair by hyperethrum, is that hyperethrum is known to be the only rhododendron we know, for those people that live along the coast. It's got root rot resistance, heat tolerance, and it was able to survive a storm surge in Hurricane Isabel. The only rhododendron after salt water over the roots came through and lived the next year. That's pretty tough. And then Steve Krebs also doing rhododendron hybridizing with hyperethrum. And that's his Southgate Splendor, which is Bessie Howells by hyperethrum. Then Augie Kerr he's done a lot of nice things. Augie Kerr was a good friend, and so I have to grow his stuff. And Russ and Velma Haig, Nip and Tuck. Here's Great Smoky, and they moved from New Jersey down to Brevard, North Carolina. Weldon Delps did a lot of hybridizing, and I think he did, part of it was his wife loved to name rhododendrons. I think they've got 400 or 500 named plants. Bold and Breezy, Rhody Romance. And here's Tom Rennie and one of his graduate students, Irene Palmer. She's involved with hybridizing rhododendrons, and I think this may be a cross of Fashion Plate, but they need stuff to work with. And so I bought one of those Bob Furman big yellows, and I took down there, so they have that now to cross on in the spring. There's still stuff to do. The West Coast, we have Jim Barlip did an awful lot in his small yard. He had about an acre or less. The front yard was landscaped. The backyard was his potting area. He had a little house where he made his crosses. He'd bring his plants in pots into his little greenhouse. He would make crosses, and you looked at how many crosses he'd make. Some of the tips, just phenomenal number of crosses. Just everything you could think of. Some of the things he produced, Windsong actually lived in our area. Fire Rim does not. And then Frank Fujioka has a beautiful garden. And this is his Midnight Mystique. Called it Midnight Mistake because he was not happy with the plant habit. But it's been used a lot in hybridizing because it has the bordered edge and the blotch. And Frank Fujioka's garden was so beautifully. It's situated on Puget Sound, big cliff, but it's falling into the ocean. But his garden is just exquisite. Lots of his hybrids, Saffron Silk, Seaview Sunset, Vibrant Violet. And there's Saffron Silk again there. So let's make some crosses this year, folks. Become a lunatic. The bees do it. Butterflies do it. People do it too. You just take the pollen from the anther, you dab it on the pistil, swirl it around, and you've made your cross. Then you go back and you collect the seed in the fall. That's a successful cross with, you see the larger seed pod. The others probably don't have any seeds in them. And then you plant the seeds. This is a good time. The seed exchange just opened. Lots of nice things, I'm sure. And then you plant them out, grow them, kill them off, and eventually get what you want. Now, we're not done yet. One of the things we'd like to do is have compact habit, great foliage. But yak dance, yak flowers open pink and fade to white. But what we would like to have is what can you expect when you do some bizarre crosses? Now, the Dick Brooks cross was a mouse versus an elephant or something like that. George Bernard Shaw was once approached by a socialite who said, with his great mind and her beautiful body, they would make the most perfect children. And he said, Madam, if the child inherits my body and your brains, we got problems. He declined the offer to marry to do that. So it's interesting to see, to try things. And Don Payton had actually done crossed yak with tomentosum. And here's a picture of the seedlings. I don't think they ever bloomed that I know of, but he did get a ledum cross and some that were hybridized with yak. So you can imagine, well, what would happen if you cross yak with the thing that looks like chickweed? Well, it could be that. Then what about big foliage? Basilicum crossed with proteoides. Now I could do the proteoides foliage on basilicum, but I had a trouble doing Photoshop trying to put big leaves on proteoides. So we have to imagine what that might turn out to be. Sinograndi crossed with proteoides. We could get those big trusses, big yellow trusses on a little tiny plant. But the question is, how many seedlings should one grow? And it's almost like playing cards. Each seedling is like a hand in a poker game. Well, you got a bummer hand right there. Some hands are real losers. The more hands you deal, though, the better your chances. So that's why when you have a cross and you raise a lot of seedlings, you could have a chance of getting a royal flush. Some are winners. So what we want to do is imagine what we'd like to have. I would like to have a yak that's as yellow as BFBY. Nice foliage. Wouldn't that be nice? You can help. We can make some crosses, plant some seeds. We can get there. So this is almost the end, but let's get down to business. If you're worried about spending money, I saw this at a plant sale. Your husband called, he said, buy anything you want. If you have a driveway, you have room for plants. If you don't have a driveway, there are places in the South that have roto mini storage. So I want to thank those people who provided images that I used in this talk. Thank you very much. And so this is the end. But not really the end. It's until we bloom again. So thank you for listening.